matter who you are, where you are, what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed, the light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now. Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Live Well, Live Whole podcast today. I'm Marie Moeller, and I'm an author, a channel, and a host of the Whole Soul Mastery podcast series. And I'm here today with Patrick Chevalier, and we're going to be talking about a number of things, but we're going to be focusing in a little bit more on conflicts and conflict management. And I'm going to bring into our conversation, because it's been in some of the transmissions I've been bringing through recently, Patrick, just this energy of we're at a precipice point, we're at a choice point, and we're really choosing vibrationally who we want to be and who we want to be, and the vibrations we have, and through our thoughts and our feelings, right? And our sentient system is the world that we're creating. That's the timeline we're inhabiting. And so every time I have a conversation with amazing beings like you, we're seeding into the consciousness of our listeners this awareness of, yes, there's a tremendous amount of change going on the planet right now. We're all feeling it, regardless of our perceptions, because that's another factor. Regardless of our perceptions, everybody can probably tune into the fact that some amount of serious change is going on in our world and in our personal lives, right?
Yeah.
And it helps to have people who are reflecting a calm in the storm, sort of a lighthouse in the storms of change, or the aspects of change that many of us are experiencing.
hmm
And so I want to welcome you to this conversation. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's so wonderful to be here with you, as
Well,
always.
it is. It is. And just for our listeners, Patrick is certified in NLP, right? He's a Reiki 3 practitioner, and he's a heart math practitioner as well from Canada.
Yes.
And so we already did one podcast where we focused, and you taught us a lot, which really helped give me a language about the different types of stress.
hmm
And that has helped me, has served me incredibly well over the last number of weeks. I haven't done the coherence breathing technique as often as I'd like, but I call it in on an as needed basis with the intention that I'm going to do the 6 weeks, that kind of protocol that you suggested. But
Yes.
all of these things are tools that we keep in our toolbox, and we can call them out anytime. So for anyone listening, anything that we share here at Whole Soul Mastery, it's not something that you have to now have more stress because it's on a to-do list.
That's it.
These are things that are available to us anytime we need them. And I'm just so
Yes.
grateful for teachers and wonderful people like you who have journeyed into some of this realm and had some of your own experiences, and have brought some wisdom teachings back to share a little
Mm.
bit from where you ventured in the hero's journey. So I'd like to invite you, if you would like to lead us off a little bit, talking about this concept of conflict and conflict management,
hmm
and what you want to say about that right now.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Conflict. Well, just like you said, in these times when there's so much change, there's um, there's a lot of polarity. Not to say that it's to certain people's advantages to keep that polarity, because it keeps us separate. It pits us the one against one another, and it keeps us weak. Just a little bit like stress, it keeps us weak. So there's so much conflict, there's so much disagreement, there's so much polarity right now with everything that's going on, whether it's politics, the COVID, the vaccine. Um, People have different opinions, and it feels like it's a very um, how do you say, not in fashion, but it's a subject that's very in the moment and appropriate in the moment
Yes,
to
yes.
discuss about that.
Yet
Yes,
very relevant to our time.
very relevant. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, uh, yeah, the being in conflict, we can each think of a situation where we were and how it made us feel, but in this time where everything is more chaotic, there's something about fighting for a point of view
Mm,
that's very reassuring. It gives us a feeling of being safe, of being right gives us some sort of control in a way.
mhm,
And that is something that we need when everything is so unstable. We try to grasp stability or control, especially control any way we can. And and and, and we have to remember, this is something that you talk about all the time when we talk about us all being one, about unity. We're all different aspects of that unity.
yes.
So all our perceptions, all our ways of thinking are different aspects of the truth with a big T, which you know we don't know, we just see or feel an aspect of.
Mm, yes.
So when we connect to that idea, I'm the first one who gets trapped and gets sucked in a situation where I get angry at people for not thinking this or for not realizing this, and all these emotions come up, and it's really interesting to observe,
Oh,
when when
very,
this
it's our
happens.
very own movie of
Yes,
us,
yes.
right?
And unfortunately, that that I think that disconnects us from a feeling that I'd like us to reconnect to right now, just for the sake of starting this discussion. And
Yes.
it's the feeling of compassion,
Mm,
you know? And just to dig a little deeper into that, I'd like, if you don't mind, you telling us, what is compassion for you, and
mm,
how does it make you feel?
mm. Wow, that's a really good question. Because when I really feel it and I don't
Hmm.
just give the definition of it, those are two different things. The definition and the true essence of it inside how it lives in my consciousness
Yes.
is is truly seeing life through another's experience or perception. So, I think, what is the expression, walking in someone else's shoes? I think
Hmm.
compassion is a way of understanding that they're a soul on a path and on a journey, and that we're all learning. And when I remind myself of this earth school, I it helps, like, my shoulders sort of to relax if I'm struggling with something and I'm trying to
Yeah.
find compassion, but I'm
Hmm.
triggered. It helps when I remind myself we're all heroes in the hero's journey, trying to
Hmm.
learn our lessons and evolve and grow and expand. And when I can find that, I do feel like I'm in a heart space of compassion, and I see differently. I
Hmm.
see when I look through compassionate eyes.
Oh, you notice that you see differently when you look
Very.
through compassion's eyes. Yes, very interesting. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I'd like to invite everybody, all our listeners, to think about that for a second. Ask themselves, what is compassion for me? How does it make me feel? And it's something that it's interesting to think of sometimes. For me, it's it's a little similar. For me, compassion is when I feel it, I feel there's a lot of love towards the other person. I become calm. I feel more connected, and there's a lot of acceptance that goes in it for me also. and there's detachment about how I feel. All that matters is the other person in front of me existing as who they are. So we're basically saying the same thing, but it's just, and it's nice to connect on how it makes us feel. It's such a beautiful feeling, compassion, I find.
It's so calming. It's
It
like
is.
in essential oils, I think one of those would be
Mm-hmm.
lavender,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think lavender is even a color that, people might be advised to like paint rooms in their house that they want to have a calmer atmosphere. And
Yes.
that might be the compassion color, in some ways. Yeah, I can feel that.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I feel a kind of serenity, and everything returns to a kind of homeostasis when I can access
Mm-hmm.
that compassion, especially in challenging moments, right? Because
Mm.
that is the true task. I can feel compassion when I'm not being triggered, but it's when you're
Of
in
course.
it. It's when you're in it that's when I've learned in my own life. That's when any real work begins. We can read books and we can take notes. We can write books. We can make
Mm-hmm.
films. We can teach classes. But when we're living it and we're truly embodying that, and
Yes.
we are triggered, and we can still go into our breathing, we can go into that
Mm-hmm.
coherence breathing, we
Mm-hmm.
can engage these tools of finding a compassionate vision or connection for someone. That's where the real work is, especially in these times we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And what I like, and it's just like the other podcasts we did actually, one of the things I like to do, and that's you were talking about teaching, is to give people tools, um, to improve our well-being, to be a little happier every day, to help us deal with things more easily. So last time it was stress and coherence, and this time is this conflict resolution. And you're talking about, I love, because what you just mentioned, when you're in it in the moment, it's very hard to connect to all that beautiful stuff like compassion and understanding. And the tool that I want to share today and discuss and exchange and expand on is actually something that you can do after. So
Mm,
it's okay if you were in the reaction mode, but you can, when you take a moment for yourself and you say, you know what, the situation, I didn't like it, it didn't make me feel good. How can I change it? Maybe even fix it, but at least change it, improve it. And that's what I want to discuss today. Yeah. So
so good.
that
It sounds like a gift we give to ourselves.
it
It's
is
like
just like
forgiveness.
the breathing.
It's like the breathing, it's like compassion and even forgiveness,
Yes.
because I think people can relate to that. There's been many times, I'm sure many people on the path have heard about somewhere in the hero's journey in the spiritual path, there's a point in which we look and consider forgiving people
Hmm.
that we have had a hard time with. And
Hmm.
some people, when they don't fully understand what that means, it feels like you're letting that person off the hook, and then we can get even more righteous about it and really resistant and say, I'm not doing that. But what you realize is forgiveness and these things like compassion, it's a gift you're giving yourself so that you can be in the vibrational timeline you
Yes.
truly want to be in, so you can be in that state of calmness.
Hmm.
It's like
Hmm.
a spa. It's
It
like
is.
your own personal spa. And who knew we could get there through compassion and through things like forgiveness and this breathing. It is amazing. And I want to hear from you. I just want to say, I love, it's like a God wink. I love how source energy, the universe, this creation was made so that things were simple.
Yes.
Humanity has made things very complicated over time.
Oh
And
yeah.
we could think we have to read like volumes and volumes and volumes of books and go deep in study about what compassion is.
Hmm.
But the truth is it's wired into us, in our
Yes.
hearts, right?
Just have to feel it.
We feel it. If we just can allow ourselves and give ourselves permission to feel it and to take those vibrational steps, make those choice points,
Hmm.
at the precipice of choice that we're all facing in a lot of ways right now. It can be the road less traveled sometimes,
Hmm.
but often it's the more rewarding path. And I think many more of us are waking up together to say it feels a lot better to find resolution and to find a new way of seeing the same scenario than it is to hold on to everything that is so incredibly painful.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I look forward to hearing more about what you're
Well,
going to share today.
let's go then.
Let's do it.
Yeah. Remember, during the last podcast when we spoke about stress, I was talking about the perception of stress, what we perceive as stressful or not at different degrees.
Yes.
So we're just going to play with that again today. We're going to play with our perception.
Okay.
And there's a saying in NLP, neuro linguistic programming. It's one of the basis of it. There's a saying that says that the map is not the territory.
Mm,
And I just love that saying. It's because we each have our model of the world. So we make in our mind a map of the territory,
mm,
the reality. But your map will write where's the forest, where's the river. Another person's map will tell you where the roads are, where the other one will have only buildings. So see, we all have a different perception of the actual territory.
right.
And that's very important to you know to remember is it's all about perception, and it will all our different perception. We often think that our way of seeing the world is we don't think consciously that the way we see things is the way we see things. We think that the way we see things is how things are,
Right.
right? But
Assumption.
it's
Assumptions partner
assumptions.
with perception.
Exactly. So when somebody doesn't have the same perception, we just go, but what are they saying? What are they doing? That's not how it is, but
Mm,
it for them it is.
right.
So by realizing that our map of the world is our map of the world and not the world and not reality, it's the same thing for other people also. So that gives remembering that gives us a little distance
Mm,
already, you know, as to what we think is real and in how we see things. And when you think about a conflict, how does a conflict make you feel?
mm,
It's usually not fun. Um, we all feel it different ways,
mm,
but it's not necessarily agreeable. It's not fun to go through it. And when we go through a conflict, because it's not fun, we will usually react to it.
right.
We will react to the difference the person has in their way of viewing the world. It makes us react. And like I said at the beginning, the fact that being right gives us a sense of control, we tend to want to bring the other person into our model of the world
Right.
because then we're reassured that we are right. We are in control.
Right.
So these are all things that we do very very automatically, and this reaction that we have um, to the other person is kind of it brings the question of what makes us react. You know,
Mm,
um, um, there's a construction to our behavior. There's a
mm,
construct to our reaction, and it's usually based on what we believe,
mm,
what is important to us, and basically who we are.
mm,
These are very interlinked. Identity, who we are, what's important to us, values, and beliefs. So these things explain how we will react to a specific situation.
mm,
Now, if these are constructs, if these are based on how we perceive the world, and we think that maybe the way that we perceive the world is not necessarily reality, it means that there is room for us to look at our reaction, our behavior, our values, and maybe question, you know, what is how much are they based on reality or how much are they a construct to help us, make sense out of this world.
mm.
This was very theoretical. So I
It's
want to pull
very
back.
powerful. It's very,
I think so.
I'm totally engaged. Really.
Okay. I didn't want to go too much into complex psychology, but I'm very passionate about that. It's really incredible for me to understand that because it's quite simple to realize these things, but it's something that we need to be able to look at.
Mhm.
You know, we need to pull back find a way to pull back and to realize how we react, to have a little more detachment, gain more flexibility, and maybe be able to tweak our perception because you're in a situation, you get into a conflict, the person has their position, you have your position, and unless a better communication happens, you're just going to stay each on your opposite sides or different sides, and won't get anywhere. So going back to when there's a conflict and you go back home, is it something that you'd like to fix in your life? You know, because we can carry a conflict with, especially with people that we love.
Mm,
We might carry that with us. I mean, you see with everything that's going on in the world, our families, couples, these opinions are so different now. They're causing a lot of conflicts within, families and couples. So um, uh, this is where I want us to realize, okay, you know what? This situation with this person, I don't feel good about it. We argue all the time. And is there anything that I can do to
mm.
maybe improve it
That's a really
or
good
to
question,
transform it?
right? Yes.
So, yeah. And we're going to use our imagination to do that. This is how we're going to play with it.
Mm,
We're going to use our imagination to play with our perceptions.
perfect.
Yeah. So,
Because otherwise, can I just say that
of
otherwise we're
course.
locked into linear time.
Hmm.
When we're in our map and somebody else is in their map, and you've
Hmm.
got that tension, you've got a perfect duality, which can be that infinity symbol. If people can imagine that in this our lower consciousness, if we want to call that the 3D world, if we want to call it that,
Hmm.
you can be locked in, both
Hmm. Hmm.
creating equal tension and nobody getting anywhere, right? And
Yes.
both really like resisting and digging their heels into the sand and saying,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not yielding. But when we use imagination, well, now we just went into a higher consciousness, right? We just
Yes.
went into a bigger skill set than our human self has, that our
Hmm.
mental minds and our egos
Hmm.
really have. Because
Hmm.
the ego knows how to go like two rams, just, but
Oh, yes.
our soul presence knows how to see from that, either that witness observer or go into the imagination where we're traveling into the ethers a little bit, what you're saying. And that's always, I think, where we get a different perspective, at least a different one.
Hmm.
And if we keep, you know giving ourselves permission to pursue that, we can find a higher one, right? Because that's where it lives. Yeah.
Yes. And
So
our imagination, is somewhere between our creation energy and our manifestation energy. You
yes.
know, what we imagine, we bring forth in some way, energetically and in thought at first, and then it moves on to materialize if we go forward with it. So imagination is so powerful, and
So
it does lead to manifestation in a way. Yeah. So, all right. So if you want to play, if you're game,
I'm game.
I'd like to go through it. We're going to revise the different steps and questions after, but thinking about understanding how we react towards what we believe in, what's important to us, and all that stuff. I want to actually try it with a real example with you if you want. So,
Okay.
if you have some sort of example where you were in conflict, um, the first question is that, do you care? Is it a conflict that you care about? You can argue with someone in a store for 5 minutes and it just, you let it be and that's it. But it's better, it's more better motivation for you to actually yourself these questions and play with your imagination if you're invested a little bit in it. So, uh, if it could be an example of a a conflict you had or a disagreement you had with someone that you care about and that you'd be willing to maybe play with a little bit and work on.
Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you, is this the time that I share, or are you leading me into another step
No,
first?
it's a time that you share. Just tell me very briefly a little bit about it. You like who it was, the name of the person, and what it was about.
Yeah, because this, I'm going to share an example, a scenario that I think also applies to my dog. So
Okay.
I'm going to take the insights that I learned through this and apply it with my dog as well. So, and I think the example that comes to mind first is I live in the United States, and I live on what we call a cul-de-sac. So it's just this little loop, and there's only about 6 houses on our
Hmm.
cul-de-sac, so it's very small. But I live in a town, so but it's a very small community on my cul-de-sac because it's only 6 families, right? And we live in a kind of funky artist town, and we've
Hmm.
got a lot of weird property lines. So they kind of snake into other people's properties. We don't have a nice square plot.
Okay.
We share trees, we share bushes. It's a little, and we share rocks, big boulders. They own like a third of it, and I own 3/4. Right? So it's a little strange, right?
Yeah.
And we have very good neighbors. Everybody is really nice in our little community here. But these property lines can get tense, and we've had people move in and out of some of the one of the houses next to us a few times. And so I've had an experience with a particular neighbor I'll be thinking of in this exercise. But some people are very generous with letting people in the easement areas. Those are the kind of shared spaces, right? Where it's definitely owned by somebody. But, talk about a map that you described. We have these maps. I'm pretty fluid in some of those maps, right? I could share space,
Hmm. Hmm.
but some in my community here don't share space very well. And there you can have that rigid map where even though our property line isn't this nice square, even if it is like a branch of a tree that goes over my property line, this other person has a very rigid map. Okay. And if it crosses into his property, that's a big deal. And there's been
Okay.
some conflict about that over the
All
years.
right.
Yeah.
Can you think of the last time where there was an actual event?
Yes.
I'm going to use the word confrontation, but discussion with that person, and can you give a name, like a fake name, maybe Bob, or
Let's
um,
go with Bob.
let's go with Bob.
Bob.
Exactly, just to give a name. Okay.
I was having company over, and
Yes.
I moved my car to the side of my driveway, and my
Hmm.
tires touched across the property line.
Hmm.
And Bob saw that. I wasn't even thinking about it because people do this all the time on the property
Hmm.
that I own. I just
Hmm.
don't think about that.
Hmm.
But for this person, it clearly was something that had to be addressed. And so he confronted, talk about conflict, but there's confrontation. He confronted
Yes.
me about that and said, "Your tire is on my property."
All right.
So
Okay.
there you have the intersection,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Hmm. All right. So I'd like you to go back to that event and maybe remember where you were, where you were standing,
Mhm.
when it was, time of the year, time of the day, maybe what you were wearing, who was there in your house that day, if you can remember that, what was said, and then tell me what you were saying to that person,
Hmm. That was amazing just how easy all the details are right there, right?
right?
We carry that with us.
Yes,
And yeah, I was actually leaving my driveway. So I was pulling out
you were pulling
and
out.
passing him in the driveway. So I was in my car leaving, and he flagged me down because this was very important to him
Hmm.
and to tell me that my tire had been touching his property. And I responded calmly but directly at first. And I said, "Oh, I wasn't aware of that." But I looked back and I was like, "Oh, I probably was," because there's like an invisible line. And I obviously had crossed it. And I wasn't thinking about that. So um I remember feeling overwhelmed because we were headed out, so that the circumstances created a tension in and of itself. I think we were even late going somewhere. So
Oh,
it
yeah.
flagged down, which adds another layer. Stopped almost. It wasn't like a police stopping you in your car, right? But people driving, and if anybody's ever been late somewhere and they get pulled over by a cop, there's a feeling of like, oh, that on top of this, right, compounds the issue. And so vibrationally, I had those energies kind of coming together.
Hmm.
And the other piece that I was saying to him that I did reflect to him is we've talked about property lines extensively over the years because this is something in his map that's really important. And I've done my best to honor that as best I can. So I was just reminding him and reminding myself um, that we have these easements and we all share space. And I'm sorry if my tire touched his. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that's what you were saying. You were telling
that's
him
what I
you were
was saying.
sorry, but then you were feeling like it was compounded with the fact of being late. How are you feeling?
It escalated inside me. I mean, I didn't get to
How?
yelling or anything. It's not my way, but I
Right?
have to say this can be a challenging issue.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you have a lot of everybody else on the cul-de-sac with give and take, right? It's just a give and take. It's fluid, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not in this scenario. So it's always so stark when it happens because you're
Yes.
just reminded, right, okay, right. It's different. You have to respect these boundary lines differently with this
Yes.
particular family because it is a
Yes.
different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember just driving away and steaming a little bit inside
Yes.
myself because it is very frustrating in there's other property lines that he drives on my property. I own part of his driveway is part of
Okay.
the example. So
Mm-hmm.
he's driving in my world every day.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good illustration though, I think, of what you're talking about with those maps. Because
Perceptions.
in my map and in my perception,
Mm-hmm.
we're all in some ways in this weird cul-de-sac driving
Yes.
on each other's properties in some
Yeah.
way, probably every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just funky like that. And so, but then when their map is their map, and even though they have permission to drive on my property, that's not how they map things. The map is that I drove on his.
Mm-hmm.
And so there isn't give and take. And it's
Mm.
so different than my vibration. Not that I'm
What
trying
is your vibration? What is it for you? Now you're talking about him, but I want you to tell me
to.
what was important to you at that time. What were you fighting for? What was important for you in this exchange with him?
Hmm. I hadn't thought about that way, the way you asked that, but it's hard to describe the setup, but I actually was trying to park on my property so that I wouldn't go onto hit. It was actually like we have already tried to navigate this differently as my own family in our driveway. We can't really turn around in this cul-de-sac. You can't really turn around. Most of us can't without driving on somebody else's property line. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
funky.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we had found a way to turn around so we don't ever go into his driveway, right? And we knew we were having people over, so we had pulled to the side of our driveway onto like the dirt gravel, right? But there's an invisible property line there. And I think what it was, with all the efforts we've been made to accommodate the very precise way he maps his world, um, I think it was just another level. There's a rigidity. There's a rigidity in this neighbor that I think when we were trying to accommodate it one way, find a creative solution, right? Because he's like, you can't drive here, you can't drive here, you can't drive here. So we found a way, and I had pulled my car over to the side of the road, so my guests were not going to have to drive in his driveway either. So I think we'd made this effort to be thoughtful, but I think there's just at the end of the day, there's a rigidity that you just can't cross. Have you ever seen the movie Serendipity? I always
Yes,
love,
yes, yes, I have.
probably a long
Long
time
time
ago.
ago. That's why it was a long time ago.
There's a scene where a character in the movie is trying to track down a receipt or something, and through the receipt is going to, make contact with somebody he'd lost touch with. But there's a cashier on the other side of that counter, very, very rigid. And the guy is very passionate because he's trying to solve this issue, right? He's trying to track someone down that he really, really wants to talk to. And the cashier is saying, you're crossing the line. Like he's rounding the countertop of like where the sales transactions and the cash register. And the rigid guy in that Serendipity movie, it's classic. Anybody who is curious, you could probably find that clip online. But everything, I can't remember the character's name to make it any easier, but he's basically saying, you're crossing the line, you're crossing the line, you're crossing the line, step back, please, right? And there's a rigidity of just like, I will not yield, I will not help you, you've crossed the line. And I think there's some energy of that in the scenario that we're talking about today, that there's that rigidity. And I guess I have, like, there's a part of me that has conflict because we're all working to make things easy in what could be a very tricky property line situation. Do you know what I'm saying?
So, what was important for you at that particular time? What were you defending or fighting for?
Hmm.
Because I asked that question, you kept talking about him and what he was, but I'm
Yes.
like, for you,
I think it's like there isn't freedom of movement. I feel restricted in a way,
so
not
you were
that
fighting for your freedom of movement.
freedom, I think freedom. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because where rigidity or restriction is, there's this feeling of expansion and breathing and freedom and
Mm-hmm.
movement, which is
I
how I
understand.
normally flow, right?
Got it.
And so that contrast was big in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for you, you were kind of defending your freedom of movement, if I understood correctly.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
and that energy around it.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
What what were you believing in at that time? What were your beliefs
Hmm.
around this situation?
That's a tough question because you know what comes up first. Because I'm just being honest. It's even more than beliefs. It was, well, there will be beliefs underneath the response, but frustration is the energy. And then there's what's the
Mm,
frustration? What's the belief in the frustration? I think the beliefs, and I think I even said this, like I said to Bob, in the situation, we've been working on this for a lot of years, right? I mean, I said this, and I think we all are working together. Like we need to work together because this isn't changing. We're always going to have to negotiate this, all the travel in our cul-de-sac, right? And the ways we move. And so
mm,
I kind of worked together with you, and I didn't feel him working with me. Maybe if there's a belief, it's that he wasn't working with me.
he wasn't
It
working
was
with you.
one-sided. It was
He was
definitely very
one-sided.
one-sided. If I were to,
Right.
boy, that's really helpful. Gosh,
Mm,
so helpful.
mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes.
And what was your positive intention in this conflict?
Mm.
Because you had a good intention.
Yeah.
Even if you screamed at him, you had a good intent. You didn't, but I'm just like,
Yeah.
whatever you did or said, there was a good intention in there somewhere.
I think I used the word give and take before, but there's this sense
Hmm.
of like, I don't know, just kind of accommodating each other. Um, I'm going to use an example, and maybe other people have experienced it with COVID, right? Because it's relevant right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
Because a lot of parents have their kids home, right, from school. One of the other families has to, because their kids are home all day long and there are younger kids and they need to play and they need to move. And so this family parks their cars out in the middle of our cul-de-sac.
Yes.
And there's a give and take with that because we all understand that COVID is happening and that family needs to move, even if other cars have to, drive around them a little bit and just be more careful about all of that. We accommodate that. We give and
Mm-hmm.
take with that. There's a
Mm-hmm.
flow.
Yes.
But I think even in this situation, and where they park happens to be part of what we own, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's part of my property. And I just don't even need to have a conversation because in my mapping, I can see this is what this family's going through. This is a time of COVID. I think we all need to be a little bit compassionate and give and take. And I don't think anything like that would really happen in this scenario. So, in that one sidedness, in that inability to accommodate, that give and take, I think whatever the belief system is in his life is property lines are property lines are property lines. And that's very different. So I can't remember what your question was, but
What was your
what was
good
my
intention
intention?
in what you said, in what you were defending,
Yeah,
in what how you reacted? What was your good intention? It doesn't have to be towards him.
towards
What
him.
was your good, not
Yeah,
necessarily, it's just your good
I
intention.
think ease, just to make it
Ease.
easy.
You wanted it to be easy.
Easy.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So there were a bunch of questions.
Yes.
Now I want to play. This is where we play the most. So
Okay.
I'm moving my chair. You might want to move your chair if you want, but I want you to close your eyes for a moment and to put yourself into Bob's shoes.
Mm.
I'm going to go further. You are Bob,
Wow.
okay? You are Bob.
Mm.
Imagine you looking like Bob, your height, your body, your clothes, the age that you have, where you live, and I want you are now Bob.
Mm.
And Bob, I want you to go back to that time when you were seeing what Marie was doing and where she parked her car, and you ran after her and you were waving at her, and you were seeing Marie in her car, and I want you to tell me what you told her.
You may not be aware, but your tire is on my property.
Hmm. And what were you thinking at that time?
I was thinking about another situation that happened in the cul-de-sac
Mm,
where a new neighbor in our little housing structure, the template of the map, somebody a house down, so not in our little close community, but one house over, had was doing something that was impacting his property lines.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay.
So I'm thinking about that.
Yeah.
And now I see this other tire on another side of my property.
Mm-hmm.
So now
Okay.
it's in two spots of my property.
Yes. Is there a little voice in your head telling you something? What's it telling you?
Oh, they have no right to be touching my property.
They have no right.
They have no right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And how are you feeling, Bob?
Kind of like a violation,
Feeling like a
offended.
violation, offended.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, what in this situation offended you, Bob?
I pay taxes.
Mm-hmm.
I work very hard to maintain my home and I do my due diligence to take care of my property and my things in a respectful manner. Of what's mine, I take really good care of it.
Okay. And what are you thinking right then and there in this situation, when you speak to Marie and you tell her that you noticed that she was parked on your side of the parking lot, parkway.
I just can't believe it. I can't believe that people
Mhm.
in our community right here can't respect boundaries. I just can't I can't believe that I'm seeing that now after
Yeah.
what I just dealt with,
Hmm.
right? And it seems like a small thing, but it's really a big thing. This tire that was on my property. Because it starts with small things.
It starts with small things. Yeah. Hmm.
Mhm.
And what was important for you at that time?
To really address in a very assertive way that I really can't have that. I really need my property line to be respected.
Right. Right. Okay.
Mm.
So that's what you were defending at that
Yes.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
What were your beliefs around this?
If I were to sell my property, if I were to move in a few months or a few years, even, and all these people are getting really comfortable driving on my property, when people go to look at my house, they're going to be confused too about what is theirs. What do they even own here? Because
Hmm.
everybody's driving on all this communal property,
Hmm.
and it's not communal property.
So it's even more important for you to defend that because of
Yes,
that.
because there's long
Hmm.
term
Right.
ramifications.
Right. Mm.
Yes.
So what's your positive intention in defending this, believing this?
If we could all understand what is ours, what the property lines are,
Yeah.
and we could be respectful,
Hmm.
there would be no need for any conflict.
Hmm.
Because if we just stayed in our own spaces, we wouldn't have any conflict. But when you touch my property and you infringe on my rights and my space,
Hmm.
now we have conflict. And my intention was to prevent conflict and to protect my family.
To prevent conflict. So you also had the good intention to prevent conflict. Wow. Okay.
Yes. In
Interesting.
future buyers too, because I'm thinking about who might live here in the future.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I don't want them to have the confusion at all because that's
Right.
uncomfortable.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. So you can close your eyes now, Bob, and step back into Marie's shoes. So take your time to come back. You're Marie now,
Okay.
other side of
Ooh,
the parkway,
feels so much
flowing.
better. Ah, yes, I feel like water. I'm back into the element of water.
Interesting.
It's the
Interesting.
earth. I think if Bob is an element, he's more earth.
Yeah.
I'm more water, right?
So yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So you have the fluidity of water and he doesn't,
No.
which is to your advantage,
Mhm.
which makes it even more difficult and explains even more the different.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes, it does, right?
So
Yeah.
now that you're back in your shoes,
Mhm.
how does your perception change of the situation? Very, very quickly. Just,
No.
realize how much it changed or how it changed.
Well, it's very powerful because I don't have underneath all of that I don't think I even said the word fear, but underneath all of that, I can tap into there's some fear there.
Hmm.
Worries about future, worries about safety and protection and doing his part to make sure there isn't confusion. And it's a lot of work
Hmm.
to have to maintain all that all the time.
Hmm.
And so when I experienced that in this exercise, I could really feel I never really felt it in this way before because I've had my own versions of finding compassion for him, but this was went a little deeper, I think. Actually being him was different. I've
Mm-hmm.
never really done that. And I can really feel that this is just one example, and I won't go on and on, but this is likely, I can only imagine one example in his life where something like this happens. But this is a mapping that he lives, and
Mm-hmm.
life can be overwhelming. And can
Yes.
people just simply not keep their tire off my property? It's very simple. This is your property, this is mine. If you should just stay off, it'll be,
He's stuck with that.
it's it's tense. There's a tension a lot,
Yes.
and I could feel that it has to be overwhelming, or it's a lot to manage all the time.
But
And
he
I
thinks
have
it's helpful for
compassion.
him. I'm
Yes,
sorry to have interrupted, but he thinks it's helpful for him to have this tension, that
yes,
it's normal and helpful, even.
yes.
There's a good intention there.
There is a
He
good intention
has to have this tension to be good, to do right.
to do it right and to take care
Yeah,
of his family. I think that's also like
of course.
I'm totally protecting my family.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
a powerful feeling
Yes.
that people can have. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you, you did Bob. Now you're back to you. Now, just for one or two questions, you pull back
Mm.
and you have Marie on one side and you have Bob on the other, and then observe everything Marie went through, observe everything that Bob went through with a little detachment.
Mm.
And I feel like asking, what do you observe?
Mm. I don't know what the first thing that comes to me is a feeling is a feeling of compassion, of just we're all in the journey, right? We're all living life as best we can, and I guess there's a feeling inside me of like he's doing the best he can, right? He's being the best neighbor he knows how to be.
Hmm.
He's
Hmm.
trying to be the best father and dad, and you know all those roles that he can be. And I relax. I'm Just feels
Connect to
easier.
compassion.
Yeah.
Connect to the compassion you were telling me about, because that's actually the next step,
Yeah.
is to connect with the compassion and ask yourself, how could it have happened differently? With this distance that you have Marie in front of you on one side and Bob in front of you on the other,
Mm,
you connect to compassion that we connected to at the beginning of this discussion.
mm.
And how could it have happened differently?
You know,
How could they have acted differently?
I think when it happened, and I'm going to answer your question, but I refer to that as that I had all the like, I've lived in my house for many years, so we've been neighbors a long time.
You're
And this,
not we, you're pulled back.
oh, I pulled
You
back,
are Marie and Bob.
but I was saying, I,
Marie,
I, I feel like I could turn to him now, and the words out of my mouth would just be, "Oh, I didn't realize that."
oh,
Right? And
magic.
I'm sorry. And we'll make an effort. We'll make an extra effort to be more mindful of that in the future. I mean, that's ultimately, and I can tell you that's what I ultimately ended up doing, because I went kind of in some kind of journey like you've led today, but a little differently. This was really powerful, but it helped me because we have invisible property lines. We I was thinking of what could I what can I put there to help myself and any drivers who don't know about all these property lines?
Hmm.
Because kids, friends would come and drive on places and think, oh, this is all their property, but it isn't. So we put a line of like solar lights in the ground. So it formed a little bit of a property line to help that. And after once I got to that point of what can I do to make this better in the future, which is where I arrived inside myself, but that's also the ease that I feel now in this exercise, is the intention of making things easy so we can flow better, putting those
Yes.
lights up helped us flow better because we're not sitting there thinking, where is the property line? Because you can't see it. So we figured that out and we put this line of lights, which I liked being light led. I really liked that solution. Unfortunately, more cars have since come and run over all of them.
Right.
Because nobody can seem to honor this property line. I don't know what to say about that. And that's bigger than me. Like, that's
Yes, yes, of course.
so much bigger than me. I think the earth itself is like, there are no property lines, right? Right? The earth is
Eh,
fluid, right? The earth is
yes.
speaking. So the earth doesn't like all the boundaries either.
Yeah.
But that's what I did. And I have since felt a greater sense of ease that that is marked in some way. And what I do is I just go to the store and I get more
Hmm.
of those lights and I just replace them because that seems to be the thing. It was the invisible line that created the problem and the discord between the maps. If it's marked for him, because that's really important for him, we have had ease since then, right? And it's that
Wonderful.
understanding, right?
Yeah.
It's that place of understanding, which is understanding, I guess, is another aspect of compassion.
Yes, it's actually accepting to go into the other person's map of the world,
Right.
right? You go into their perception a little bit, and that's what we played with,
Yes.
right? So, basically, that's what we did. First, you just go through the experience as you put yourself into the other person's shoes, then you go back to you. What happened? Pull back, add compassion,
Right.
and then go back in as you. And you did that. I didn't even, you skipped steps, and that's wonderful. It just shows how it flowed for you. You naturally you were going there.
Right.
So it's perfect. And the questions, there's a lot of them. And if you want, like I can provide them to you,
Yes.
the different steps and the questions. But basically it's the same question, whether it's you or Bob. It was about finding ways to relive and put yourself back in the situation, where, when, how, what, and all these questions,
Mm.
and then try to understand what was important for you. What were the values you were defending? What were your beliefs? How were you feeling?
Right.
And what was the good intention, which is usually the message, the real message. And after you ask a couple of questions, you were able to touch that message a bit more. And at every question, I could see you react and say, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I didn't think of that, because that's the thing. We don't take the time to question how we reacted and why.
Right.
And this is why it's fun also, because it's after it happened, if you realize it's a situation that's bugging you, and you're just holding it on your shoulders, and you just find a way to change it or take it off or whatever, you're able to take a little time
Yeah.
and play with that. Ask yourself these questions, and you'll be like, oh, what was I defending? Why was that important to me? Or, oh, I was believing that. That's what was going on. And
Mm.
then when you put yourself in the other person's shoes, well, that just
A big game changer.
it's a big game changer, especially if it's someone you love and you care about. There's something, play with it.
The other.
So especially when it's someone that you're close to, you can, when you put yourself into that person's shoes, you will, you'll say, okay, so I'm Bob and this is Marie, and let's say you have a close relationship, you're good friends, you'll be like, okay, so how do I feel about Marie? Okay, yeah, and maybe you have memories that you've had of experiences with Marie that were different or good or bad, whatever, and you really put yourself into that other person's shoes. It's even more powerful when you know the person and you're
Mhm.
close to that person. It's just interesting to play with, and there's not that many questions, and it's the same for both situations. So I think that's a great tool
It's a
to,
powerful tool.
yeah, to go into the person's way of thinking and their map of the world, and to add compassion to that,
Mm.
um, And that's also why, we talked about compassion at the beginning. It was just that kind of to anchor it, to reconnect to it,
right?
and have it there very close, even before we went into the actual exercise of the conflict resolution.
And that's what happens when we have our spiritual toolbox.
Yeah.
When we have things that we've chosen or recovered or rediscovered
Hmm.
and learned, it's nice when we have those things there, because when things like this come up, we know how our neurons fire and wire together and what the reaction will be if we don't reach for one of those
Hmm.
tools.
Hmm.
And it's such a blessing to have tools like this and to pay into them, to invest in them when you're not triggered. That's why practicing, and sometimes people, it can be, they might find that harder, like, well, it's not in front of me, I don't know what I'd be doing. But if we can just have the consciousness of like feeling the energy of compassion and just that, so that when something comes up that requires our compassion,
It's closer.
it's closer, it's right there, it's right
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Yeah, it's
And
it's so powerful. And I think this applies like any conflict that anybody's going through, whether it's countries and right, discord and war.
it does.
At the core of these are the beliefs. And at the core there's vibrations and there's feelings. And some of those things could have been seeded and started decades ago,
Hmm.
centuries ago.
Hmm.
And we're still carrying these conflicts through time until someone in the experience of all that makes the choice, right? And starts to use tools like these to melt that tension away. And then, as we talked about before, you've got the duality in the infinity sign. But from
Hmm.
this higher lens of perception, you have infinity, where everything is just perfectly harmoniously interconnected, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's so calm, isn't it? Yeah.
Hmm. I just love these little tools, and share them with people, and just put a little more light, a little more consciousness, because you're putting light and consciousness into yourself by playing that little game.
Yes.
You're going a little deeper than you usually go to. You dare to ask yourself a question. You dare to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So whether you like it or not, you're kind of giving them a reason to be who they are, and allowing them to be who they are.
Yeah.
And energetically, I can't even imagine how wonderful it must be, because you're giving them that compassion just by doing this, like, remotely, just by doing this exercise, and you're you're validating their who they are energetically just by playing this game. And that's a gift you give to yourself. That's a gift you give to them.
And I'd imagine, Patrick, even though I skipped some steps at the end, is there like a 7, 8 step? Like, did we get that far where you think about what you could do differently? And, or is there, I'm curious because I feel when you can do this retroactively, you don't have to be this perfect human being that never has a response or
Yeah.
reaction. You can
Yeah.
be very compassionate with yourself and you can
Hmm.
heal it later, which is really nice because there we don't feel like we have a lot of tools that after we can do some energy healing and reset in many ways what happened. um, I can see myself, whether it's sending some of those compassion frequencies, even gratitude for that whole scenario gave me
Experience.
the opportunity to have this conversation with you, to even bring this into a podcast that illustrates this to other people. Didn't even know that Bob was a teacher. Right, when all that happened, I wasn't thinking, oh, years from
Oh.
now or months from now we'll bring this in here. And but the universe knows that. And so there's many layers to the gifts of even conflict if we can do the work to
Hmm.
recover the gems.
God, yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes. I mean, teachers are everywhere.
Every
You know that everywhere.
And they come in all forms and in all
Hmm.
kinds of costumes. And
People that trigger us are teachers, situations that trigger us are teachers. There's always a positive philosophical discussion for an hour we could
yes,
have, but uh, I a gift to grow and to I don't like testing because we're not being tested, but it's an opportunity to realize how we react to things. And if only we would realize that, every time we react and it's or we're in a situation where we don't feel good, well, there's actually a way to reframe our perception so that it doesn't feel as bad,
Mm.
because the person next to you in that same situation could fly through it as if nothing's wrong. And if there's no problem, they're not feeling the hard, the difficulty, the pain, the suffering that you do in a situation. They'll just accept it and move on. The
Mm.
only difference between the two of you is your map of the world and how you perceive things.
Right.
So there's every situation and hardship, I believe, is there to make it point at us. Look, you could work on that. You could be happier. For
Mm.
me, is you could be happier. And
Yes.
it's hard to believe because when you're in the drama, you're like, this is not there to make me happier. But right. But at the same time, yes, because if you learn the lesson, adjust what needs to adjust within you so that you can just, the next time it happens, it won't be as difficult. You'll be happier because of that. For me, it's all about, increasing your vibration and self-care.
Yes, that's a
Self-care.
big one. Self-care. Absolutely. And you
Yeah.
begin to, if we've talked about layers of karmic contracts or just debris in our field of like old beliefs, old stories, old patterns. But when we do this work and we have tools like this and we can move energy like this, because I love to move energy, which is part of that, why that was a particularly challenging scenario for me. But we
Hmm.
begin to build these layers of happiness, these vibrational layers that form this spiritual fortitude that we have, this what becomes bliss, right? If you have enough experiences where you can alchemize conflict into happiness,
Yes.
over time you just become someone that sees happiness and joy and bliss everywhere you go.
Hmm.
But it takes practicing. It takes, being the hero of your own journey, the person in the experience who's calling in these tools when it's hard and when it's new to us, right? That's when it feels a little strange. But you could see, our listeners could see this in this experience. I've never been through that experience with you, Patrick, before, but it was easy to just sort of go into that process and try on something that's new. And my brain, I think you pointed that out, it was wired to say, but this is his perspective, and you kept saying, but now what's yours? And that, did you see how my brain went,
Hmm.
wah?
Oh, I did. I did. Very
And
interesting.
you have to bring, and I'd imagine if you practice this, you go through that cycle with yourself
Hmm.
quicker because you just get better at it like anything.
Yes.
And then you get into that place of you can see what your intentions were, which, and that's what I was saying, is that somewhere in all conflict there probably was a good intention in
There always is.
always.
Every behavior is there because of a good intention. There's actually no exception in this. Even the most violent act, the person had a good intention for them to
And they're
doing
mad.
that act in their mind, in their map, exactly in their map. And so there, it's not most of it's always,
Yeah.
always. And so this whole thing about being more conscious about why you reacted the way you reacted, what you were fighting for, what were your beliefs, what was the good intention behind it. The more you practice this in any situation, by the way, the more you practice this, the more it comes naturally, and the more you are aware of what it is you're actually wanting to convey as a message, because you're aware of your intention, you're aware of your beliefs, and so it will eventually, it comes to a point where you do not react the same way, more live
Mm.
than by thinking of it retroactively, like we just did,
Right.
going back into the experience. Because it's
Right.
like the time. between the event and this work and this questioning becomes shorter and shorter and shorter until you're
Yes.
actually in a live manner directly connected to that good intention, and so your
Mhm.
message is more clear,
Wow.
and that compassion is more there to understand the difference, and you will
Wow.
let the other person react, but
Right.
you will not react the same way.
Right.
Maybe they'll turn around, go back home, and in their mind there'll be a conflict, and for you it wasn't a conflict, it
Right.
was an exchange, a discussion,
Yes.
and eventually that's where you get to.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just felt that as you were talking about it, and I use the word alchemy, but it also neutralizes.
Yes.
Compassion is very neutralizing,
Yes.
right?
Acceptance of
Acceptance,
the other one.
right?
Oh, I understand who you are and how you are, what you are, and I understand your good intention. And so I might not agree, but okay. There is a connection there. It's not just polarity,
Right?
there's a connection, there's compassion, there's understanding. Because
Wow.
having different opinions, that's not going to disappear, but
No.
it's how we live them that I tag conflict, management. But it's the difference of opinions is going to happen. How do we deal with them? How do we react to them? How do we communicate better?
Mm. And so essential, like a vital tool and skill
Yes.
to learn about and to experience in these times,
Yes.
because I think we are needing tools like this with the polarity on the planet.
Hmm.
And a good friend of mine who is in some of the roundtable podcasts, Caroline Chang, one
Hmm.
of the messages that she felt come to her in the last number of years was unity in diversity, and that we're going to have to begin to come to terms, probably through some compassion exercises like this, with allowing that diversity, those differences of opinion, right? Coming from different perspectives and still seeing through the eyes of unity, or seeing
Yeah.
through the lens of compassion. Yeah, and allowing and acceptance. It's a journey. I
Yes,
mean, we
it
don't
is.
just like snap our fingers and poof, right? We feel that. It takes practice, and it
It
takes
does.
a consciousness. Yeah.
So I'm so thankful for everyone who took the time for you, of course, always, but for the people who took the time to listen to us, to
Yes.
go that little step into, you know what, I'll listen to it. You know what, I might even try it, because you're bringing light to yourself, you're giving love to yourself, and you're automatically giving it to the entire world. So that's my opinion. So thanks everyone for listening and for being there with us on this journey.
Right? On the
Yeah,
journey, exactly.
yeah.
So, yes, well, I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for this experience today, and the takeaways that I have been given. This give and take with you has been very beautiful, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
And
It
for
was
our
wonderful, a
audience
lot of
here.
fun.
And we'll be back with more podcasts with Patrick, because the way you share the information, I think the way you make it so accessible, we can all relate to the way you express these concepts, and then you help us have these concepts drop down into a lived experience, and that has the hallmarks of a true teacher, and that's a gift. And so I'm so blessed to be in podcasts with you, Patrick, and I look forward to receiving more of this guidance and these insights with you. And I would invite our listeners to join us in this podcast, to share this with people that could benefit from this wisdom, and to find us at wholesoulmastery.com, and to find us on YouTube at Whole Soul Mastery. I'm sharing these videos on Color the Magic. And also, you can find them on Rumble and Minds and Gab as well, because we're expanding. 2021 is inviting
Yes.
expansion. And so we're sending our messages out there. And so, whatever platforms, and these are also available by podcast. So if you find that you like this podcast and others, you can always tune in through Spotify and other platforms where you just listen to audio podcasts as well. So you can take us with you when you travel, right? And that's that's really beautiful. So thank you everyone for joining us. And until next time, blessings. Namaste.